Welcome to this edition of Supply Chain Spotlight. I'm JT Engstrom with FreightWaves. Joining me today is a special guest, Spencer Tenney, President and CEO of the Tenney Group, an advisory firm based out of Franklin, Tennessee, who's very active in the surface transportation space. Spencer, it's a pleasure to have you with us in the studio today to talk one-on-one.
Yes, it is a pleasure. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
How was the drive down?
Always beautiful. I do love Chattanooga very much.
It's relatively warm for January and sunny. Yeah, that's a phenomenal drive.
Oh, it's just a great day. My wife and I, we talk about it. We said, what a time to be alive right now. And that drive was just a good part of it.
Right. And not too long of a road trip, but enough to kind of reflect on 2020 and maybe put together some thoughts on 2021. So
oh, yeah.
It'll be fun to talk through.
Yes, sir.
And so within that context, I know the last time we filmed was sort of summer of 2020. Obviously, the first half of 2020 was very unique. And we had opined as to what we thought the second half of the year might look like. Can we talk a little bit about what ended up matriculating and materializing in the M&A space for trucking and logistics and around the fringes of that final mile?
Well, I think that, again, there was what we expected and there was what we experienced.
Right.
And I think in general, there's a couple of different themes that I would say. Number one, when you go back to like March and April, a significant pause, from both buyers and sellers, just trying to figure out how to make sense of what this is. And really what happened was there was just a tremendous amount of new risk injected into the marketplace that obviously are going to affect the way that people approach transactions. And so there's a little bit of an orienting that had to take place for people to kind of get their strategies adjusted to that. Some of the people that would have sold either because of the performance dip had to kind of reevaluate, or it was just because they were blowing and going, didn't have the bandwidth to consider exiting at that time because, COVID kind of arbitrarily created significant winners and significant losers. And so as a result of that, what we saw in the second half was just several different things. Number one, we had a tremendous amount of buyers come to us saying, okay, we know that you have our buyer profile, the types of deals that we have historically asked you to bring to us. We don't want that anymore. This is what we want. And a lot of it had to do, because of all of the new risk entered into the market, there was this high sensitivity about doubling down on whatever they were doing at the current time. So this acquisition as a effort to diversify became a very central theme. That's one thing. And then a lot of folks, as the sellers didn't enter the market, there was this urgency because when there's a shortage of supply of available companies to purchase, it meant that much more challenging for aggressive buyers to get the right deals in place. And so we saw tremendous intensity in the negotiation and just the competitive bidding around deals in that second half. It was pretty entertaining.
That's remarkable. And so in terms of winners and losers, first and foremost on a fundamental side, and then secondarily to your point on a valuation side, sitting at the negotiation table, were there core themes within who fundamentally you saw outperform versus underperform, either at the sector level or the subsector level? And then similarly at the negotiation table, do those correlate one-to-one, or were there perhaps some differences based off of a variety of factors?
I think that, winners and losers, I think there were certain verticals, be it refrigerated trucking, and they were just off the charts. Many of our clients, we had clients that we had engaged that had to press pause because their numbers got so good during that period. They had to kind of step back and now I don't know if I can, I might have to reevaluate my exit goals of what I'm going to do based on all this new great information. And then we had other folks that were, maybe in the liquid bulk side or fuel hauling, and it was just game over, basically overnight. And those, we saw pivots, like we're not even in the fuel business anymore. We pivoted, we've had all the drivers, we're in drive-in now. Yep. So I think part of that was people just trying to make sense, reinvent themselves as best as they could. From a negotiating standpoint, where you saw that show up the most is just, what was really interesting is that how both buyers and sellers, you just saw this humanity. Like, because COVID touched everybody, it's kind of universal. So we literally had comments where, okay, hey, we just got our financials back. We had a 30% dip last quarter. And the buyers would be like, we get it. It's all right.
That's interesting.
You and I know.
That's interesting.
And you and I know that doesn't happen in any other context.
Right.
But what you saw were buyers and sellers acknowledging the risk for what they were, which was non-reoccurring. This is like a 100-year pandemic. And then, so what can we do to acknowledge the risk, share those risks as part of transferring ownership, but not be punitive in the way that we go about doing it? And so where you might have in the past, either one, there is no deal, but you might have an earn-out structure over a 3 to 4 year period to address those risks. Well, we had deals where we had 8 to 9 month different periods. It was just like, hey, just prove it out in terms of like, we understand the risks, we understand that it's non-recurring, the performance is signaling that it's going to normalize, and once it does, we'll pay you cash at the end of that earn-out. And so I think that was one of the most interesting things as far as this human level of people be much more reasonable and fair-minded at the deal table than I've ever seen them.
That's interesting. That's unique, and certainly to your point, not common in a normal context.
Right.
And it's great that a lot of buyers were still able to secure attractive financing, which, independent of where interest rates may or may not have gone, actually securing large amounts of financing can still be difficult regardless of the rating market. So that's tremendous. So within that context, given that setup, so there was an element of reasonability at the end of the year, acknowledging the fact that financials and fundamentals were very mixed across the board. How does that set us up for entering 2021, realizing that TTM financials also still cross over that period of time, 1, 2, a lot of deals or some portion of deals were either never entered market if they otherwise perhaps would have, or entered market and then were put on pause for a variety of reasons, whether uncertain about the downside or actually so good that they maybe didn't want to go to market, right? And then in addition to that, buyers, whether sponsors or strategics, are, have to be thinking to themselves, it might be a really good time for us to get back into the acquisition game, given we, might not have had as robust of a 2020 as was previously anticipated.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that are going to unfold. I think the buyers, number one, just more buyers are entering the market out of necessity. I think that there's just, as much as they've tried to address some of these building challenges through organic growth, it's just very difficult to do it through organic growth alone. At some point, you have to get some economies of scale. So I think, not because they necessarily have a desire to grow through acquisition, but there's just a practical element that they have to integrate it in some way to be competitive. So I think that's part of it. And but as far as on the capital side, I think that there still is significant capital. There were banks, large banks in the last half that had wide global scale acquisition financing moratoriums. And so I think now that we're getting signals that they're back online, there is a little bit more comfortability with what's happening. So I think that there's going to be a lot of activity. It's going to be aggressive because there's a window of time where they feel like the tools in which to get a deal done, that you can actually address both the buyers and sellers' goals. It's good for now, but who knows how long that will be.
That's interesting. And have you been able to read any of the tea leaves of what the financing market on the credit side may or may not feel like throughout 2021, both in terms of costliness or affordability, in terms of your actual rating, and also the willingness of credit providers to offer certain types of financing to lend into these deals?
It's a mixed bag. I don't really know. I think we're still making sense of it. I think they're still making sense of it, really. But I think that there's going to be opportunities. The majority of where the acquisitions are going to take place, 85 to 90% of the deals are coming through strategic buyers or private equity-backed strategic buyers. And so they already kind of have their financing sources built in. Either they're, through the private equity group, or they're going to be through a combination of equipment financing, line of credit, and they're doing those things. And so I think for the people that are actually getting the deals done, there's a lot of new people looking at deals, but I think we're still kind of getting back to the main players doing most of the deals.
Interesting.
And so I think they've got their credit sources locked down, and I think they feel very confident that they're going to be able to be very active. Interesting.
And now when we talk about valuation, the sort of running joke is around, EBITDA C,
Yeah.
You know, your EBITDA plus COVID adjustment.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to the market making process and what people do and don't, you know, what buyers and sellers do and don't decide. That C actually is at the final table. How has that materialized in your view, and how do you think about that?
I think that what we saw in 2020 was, I mentioned how reasonable people were. The question is, will the folks that benefited in an unusual way due to COVID, are they going to be as reasonable in 2021 when that same normalization is required at the closing process, in the negotiating table? So if you had a historic year that is non-reoccurring, well, a savvy buyer is going to expect to normalize that, just as in the same way that the seller who was not a beneficiary, who actually was unfairly punished or damaged by this one-time event. You know, so I think that's part of the deal as far as how they'll adjust it moving forward. It's just going to take reasonable heads at the table and kind of talking through things about what's real and what someone can expect. So in general, heavy emphasis on projections, using this as a guide to project what's going to happen moving forward, but leaning, on past, current, and future performance, the blend of that much more heavily moving forward.
That's interesting. And so now, are there certain subsectors of the market that you see as being most interesting to buyers right now and throughout the next year? Obviously, there's some themes, but I wonder if at the nuance level, there are a few insights that you've parsed out.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, by far, the most active is the final mile space. I think it presents the greatest challenges, and with that, just in your world, I'm sure you can appreciate that's what typically attracts the highest amount of investment, because the most opportunities there. If you can figure out how to solve these problems, there's tremendous upside. But it's a highly fragmented vertical. And so for those that really want to do well in that space, it's very complicated. It's very demanding from the retailer as far as what they're wanting. And so what's happening is you have capital sources recognizing that there's a game to win here. And rather than trying to reinvent it or trying to home grow talent to go do it, they're looking at what's the best talent, what are the best systems already available in the marketplace, and they're aggressively going out to acquire those. And that's why we did 3 final mile deals in the last 12 months.
That's remarkable. That's a lot of deal flow in that segment.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people you can talk to who can say that. And that's a very attractive segment right now, too, not just on the tail of e-commerce, which is obviously a huge secular trend, but in the strategic operating company space, almost all operating companies are looking to target some type of final mile play.
Yeah.
And so within that context, if you were sitting down with a founder, or owner, or operator, what type of advice and thought process would you be walking them through as they think about strategic alternatives over the next 1, 2, 3 years?
I mean, I think the big thing, and this is not getting a ton of attention right now because we're all kind of, shuffling through the politics of this all, but we have a president, and there's a proposed tax plan that's pretty material for those that are kind of on that fence about what they want to do in or out of transportation logistics over the next 1 to 5 years. And so, the tax plan, and I'm not a tax specialist, but it's pretty straightforward in terms of what it means. Basically, taking what is now capital gains, roughly 23.8% up to about 43% for everything over $1 million from a business sale. So when you do the math on that, that's literally about 1.9 million in new taxes for every 10 million of the purchase price over $1 million. So if you're a $50 million brokerage company, that's literally $10 million in new taxes as part of that transition.
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal. And so for those, I think it's a tremendous opportunity because it'll get people's attention. My hope is that for those that want to reinvest in this space, it's like a little kick in the pants. It's like, hey, it's time to innovate and do something special because you're kind of required to. But I also people got to get organized and get their team of advisors around them and go into the future eyes wide open, because if this is something that you're planning on from a retirement or from an impact giving, it's big numbers.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And now, do you think that at the CFO level, perhaps, or at the corporate strategic finance level, that fundamentally shifts some of the ways companies do or should think about managing cash flows / distributions versus capital reinvestment, understanding that capital reinvestment is what helps build out the future profitability of the operating company?
Well, I think it's just more about, okay, there's significant things that are eating away at the earnings, especially on the truckload side, as far as the insurance, driver retention, driver recruitment. And so the reality is if you don't have a very specific plan on how to offset those expenses, you're basically absorbing all of that value loss because it's eating directly away at the earnings. And then if it's the double whammy, if you add the tax onto that, it makes it very difficult for people that are not growing their businesses and building value to for them to have a meaningful exit from this industry.
Right.
And so I think that's what creates the emphasis from an operational standpoint. If you're going to be here for 10 more years, I think that's you should always be running your business as if you want to sell it. And by doing that, you don't have to sell it. So I think that the deal is, from the distribution standpoint, is not as much of just like understanding, if I decide to sell my business, how is a buyer going to look at it? What's driving value? And am I requiring my team and my leadership staff to go out and build value in those specific value driving areas?
Right.
I think that's my encouragement to the business owners in this space, is that it's a tremendous, exciting industry, but it's one of the most unforgiving spaces of all industries.
It's a very challenging operating landscape for sure. And so with that, are there any final thoughts that you would provide to the audience around your perspective on the outlook for the next 6 months, and perhaps any more personal comments for founders and owners regarding their, not only necessarily what they should be thinking through with respect to strategic alternatives, but actually perhaps even before that, encouraging them to start thinking about strategic alternatives and being prepared for multiple different outcomes or scenarios?
Yeah, I think my encouragement to business owners is that I come from a place where, I'm a family-owned, second-generation guy. So my desire for those that have a desire to have a legacy business, I want that for them. In order to do that, they have to do the things that I'm talking about. They have to go and build value. They have to go out and consider, if you haven't done acquisitions before, number one, you need to consider it, but number two, it's not as hard as you probably think it is, and you probably have the resources to do it right now, using a combination of lines of credit and equipment financing. So if you surround yourself with people that are going to encourage and challenge you to go do that, get in a best practice group. Those are the types of things that I'm passionate about, because this is not an environment, it's an exciting environment, but it's not one that you want to be a lone wolf. Lock arms with people, share best practices, build value. And if you know what to do, but in your heart of hearts, you just know you're not going to do it, then don't take any unnecessary risks.
Right.
I think that's pretty basic, because life's too short. Go do something else. Go impact, go do something to start a new business, go bless your community, focus on significance. There's just so many things that you can be doing.
Right.
Cheering on your industry best friends. Let them take the lumps while you go do something else. But I love the people in this industry. I think it's going to be an exciting time over the next 6 months, and I'm encouraged that we'll see a new era of leadership rise up and do some just amazing things in the space.
No, I would agree with that, and it's certainly a very unique and tightly knit ecosystem, which is tremendous. It's a great community. Yeah. And so with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you, not only having the opportunity to discuss with you, but having you in person in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is always phenomenal.
That's right.
And so please bring our best wishes back to Franklin.
We'll do it.
And tell the team we said hello. And we'll be cheering for you. We expect you guys to have a great deal year, and I'm very confident that you will. And I think it'll be a very successful year for you.
Well, we hope to be back and tell you about it.
That's right. We would love to have you back for that. And so with that, Spencer Tenney, President and CEO of the Tenney Group, thank you for joining us. I'm JT Engstrom with FreightWaves. Have a great day.